Coogs House. It's time for book club.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Andrews. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater can step by, I don't know, I could be a hater of Hakeem Olajuwon, but we appreciate you making us your first, second, third, fourth, whatever listen today, because at this point, this bonus episode is a book club with guest Mirin Fader. Could be any and all of the above. We appreciate all the same. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. And today's episode, we're going to be looking at the book Dream, The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. We're going to continue with our book club series of bonus episodes. This one, I'll admit, we kind of fly through a big section of the book. We go from, I believe it's chapter 8 to 14. Now, that's long, but work with me here. This is a Houston Cougar podcast, and ultimately, this section here, it kind of talks about the first portion of Hakeem's Houston Rockets career. Right now, as a Houston Cougar great, I think that's important to be paying attention to. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We'll talk more about that and that kind of fun later, right? But as far as this big section of the book goes, Mira and I kind of fly through some themes of it, but I will say you kind of need to have read it to be following along. So if you haven't, go to Amazon, wherever you get your books. We'll put a link in the show notes. Go grab a copy of Dream, The Life and Legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon by one Mirin Fader. It's a great book, great read. We're going to talk through that section of it right now. So without further ado, let's bring on Mirin.
I think it's more of a mix of things. I think they were so famous, and I wonder if that attention was starting to like really seep through, because it is hard when you turn into celebrities overnight, right? Like before Texas, who plays basketball in Texas? Like it's just a football state. And I think everyone was so like giddy about this run. And I wonder if that attention really got to them and their focus. The other thing was like the underdogs suddenly weren't the underdogs anymore. Like they were the ones seen as the favorite, and that can really psychologically mess with you. Like NC State was coming into that game like, oh, they're Goliath, we're David. And the Cougars were used to being that their like entire college career. So I think that was odd. I also think it was just a testament to how well NC State played and their game plan and slowing them down and just getting after it. Like all the people I talked to from NC State were just like, we believed we could do it. We absolutely believed we could do it. My uncle always said to me, when I played, like, honestly, the winner is just like who has more points when the buzzer sounds. So sometimes you just run out of time. And I think like if one thing goes different, right? Like that Benny Anders, like near steal, or, where was Hakeem on that last play? Why wasn't he up top? I mean, you could go through it again and again and again. And I think that it really just came down to like one moment.
Well, and it's fascinating because that one moment, because of the NC State's coach being Vavon, it all carries into like an iconic moment,
right,
across college basketball in general, all of sports, because like it just continues to be a big thing. Last year, NC State had somewhat of a magical run in the tournament, but I would stress that they're not the basketball powerhouse that their neighbors, North Carolina and Duke, are by any stretch. This was a special time in history for the school. And it's weird that Houston's time just lined up kind of wrong. Again, spoiler alert, that Houston Rockets end up winning a title in this book. But really, and I actually can get emotional talking about that part when we get there too, but it really is not a city, while it's had tons of great athletes, the Nolan Ryans, the Earl Campbells, Hakeem himself, it's not a city with a lot of championships in it. Right. And so this like thought that like they were that close, things lined up just a little wrong, it is kind of very iconically Houston, weirdly, right? Like second place a lot. And I thought that was the emotions of that, and kind of like the
the roller coaster of that, or maybe it's more of a true peak and valley of the Phi Slamma Jamma experience. And looking back at the Phi Slamma Jamma experience, because we're going to jump into the draft and that kind of stuff next, because you do, that is also interesting. I also want to go through the Rocket stuff with you as a fan of his, but I also think there's some legacy building at the city of Houston there too. So I don't mean to say we're cutting this anytime soon. And looking back at those college years, right? Is there a moment that was really fun to report on, really fun to dig into? That's, again, more than 40 years ago at this point. So you're uncovering stories that have kind of been under the surface, if not lower, for a long time, right? While that sounds extraordinarily difficult, I'm imagining it's also fairly cool and rewarding to find something. Was there something that jumped out to you, like, I couldn't believe I found this, or got to talk to that, or anything like that?
I think it was the first time that Hakeem dunked on Moses, and how it was like this iconic, like everyone in the gym is like, oh my God, and like he just dunked on him, he put him away, and like it was a very like, okay, young fella type of moment. And I love that moment. And then when, the players are describing when they finally beat the Rockets players at Fondy over the summer, and how that was like such a big moment for them. Like that's when they knew that they were going to take over college hoops, was like they beat their older brothers. So like, I think those were the most fun for me. Especially like, Moses, like picture dunking on Moses, like the scene. I mean,
there are not a lot of NBA guys that have done that, like, because there are people that tried.
No, exactly. I mean, it like floored me, and I felt like, oh my God, because somebody's quote arrival. It's not often in the official games. It's in the moments in pickup games. It's the respect, and everyone is dogpiling you. Oh yeah, you just dunked on him, and and at first the gym is like dead silent because they're like, I can't believe did he just do that? Like, is that a real thing? And so I think it's like, I love those playful moments. That's so great. That's not something that was captured at the time in newspapers or, later in the 30-30. So I love that. The other thing was so random. He, forgot who told me this, but Hakeem like couldn't dance, but then towards the end of his like college years, he was such a good dancer and a ladies' man.
But so I gotta be honest, you mentioned in the book that he in his early college career could not dance, and I A, can relate, but B, when I think of all of the things we used to describe his game, it's all footwork and grace and beauty. And that dude can't dance? How can anyone dance?
I think because like if you go back to the early chapters of this like awkward tallness and feeling out of place, and it's a social thing. I think like it goes back to your point of maturation, right? Like anyone in college, we grow up. He becomes more comfortable in his own skin. And I think that was the change, rather than like a technical difficulty.
Well, because I guess he does learn, I guess, because I did not learn, but fascinating, because I can't imagine him not being able to do something that is quasi athletic.
Right, he could do anything.
Just crazy. All right, so he does leave the University of Houston, and a key part of who Hakeem Olajuwon is 40 years later is that he ends up also being drafted by Houston. The Rockets get to take the hometown kid, first of all, and it also ties, I guess, into the Fondy stories. There are not many major universities in the 30 NBA cities, right? Like you have USC and LA, which I guess USC, UCLA, and then the two LA NBA clubs. Miami, which I guess has had decent basketball lately, and the Heat. There aren't. It's not like NYU is good and in the backyard of the Knicks, right?
Imagine though.
Well, I could make an argument to like, why isn't Northwestern better? They got Chicago right there, but they're not, right? That's part of the story, is that there aren't many places this could happen.
Quick break in the action. Remind you that today's episode is brought to you by our buddies over at Roy. So, Cougs fans, it's time to remember and recognize the player of the week in the Houston Cougars football game of the weekend. That is Hershey McLaurin, who is all over the place defensively. So, over the season at Roy, they've pooled over $20,000 support players On Roy, micro deposits, massive changes. The Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go directly to the player you choose. And unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates and so on. The best part is that it's all risk free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. So this week, supporting Hershey McLaurin, I just pitched $100, and I'd love for you to join me. $10 to your favorite Houston Cougar football, basketball, women's basketball, whatever you got. Let's show the Cougs you love, and you keep them connected to the school. Remember to pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your sport sets up your team for success. Don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, use code LOCKEDON, and you're entered just like that. If you're already on Roy, congrats. Thanks for joining me. And don't worry. Any contribution to an athlete's campaign will also get you entered automatically. No person necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy today. Use and join the NIL game with no subscriptions, no fees. Be sure to follow them on Instagram, Facebook, X at Roy_return on you for more info. Roy, sports players change the game.
I think you did a really good job of outlining. I want to talk through like what was the randomness of him ending up in Houston. Both comes down to a literal coin flip,
Right.
and is in the last year that it could have historically ever come down to said coin flip. Right? They institute the ping pong balls or the envelopes and stuff the next year.
Right.
So I mean, there are other factors in him getting drafted by the Rockets, but he was consensus number 1 pick. It was whoever got the pick, and the Rockets got the pick in a weird, fortuitous way. You're reporting that, you're like, what? Putting pieces together, like, what's going on here? Like, that feels too lucky.
Yeah. So the thing about books, I was like, okay, I already know it's going to be 400 pages. Nobody is going to read a 500-page book. So there was a long, long section on did the Rockets tank to get Hakeem Olajuwon? And
spoiler, I would believe yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's things we know to be true, and then things journalistically we cannot say are true without absolutely 100% proving it. But we know it's true, but we can't say it's true, but it is, but it's not. So that was the tanking section for me. I went so deep in this rabbit hole of, trying to get people to, did you guys tank? Was it a thing? And I got so many people saying like, yes, of course they tanked. Problem is a lot of, people around them have passed, like, Charlie Thomas has passed. But, for the people that are still alive, it was very much a consensus of like, of course they tanked. That is the only reason why they got the number 1 pick back to back to get Ralph Sampson and Hakeem. However, journalistically, you literally cannot prove that 12 people on the court were intentionally trying to throw games and not play hard. You can't, that's not something you can prove and or confirm with every single person that was intimately involved in the team. So it just felt irresponsible to kind of put that out there, even though we literally know that that is why the draft was changed after that point, to prevent such occurrences from happening. However, we got to also say, as a lover of storytelling and narrative, I love the fact that it worked out like this. What a magical thing. Again, dreamlike. So I think we know why it happened, but it doesn't happen because it's not supposed to happen.
Well, I understand you're a journalist. I'm a podcaster. We lie all the time. I think they absolutely tanked. I'm not upset about it. And I would stress that, tanking does not necessarily mean the 12 players on the court were not playing hard as much as organizationally, right. Hey, you should sit out with that cough tonight or whatever, right? Those kinds of bigger picture things. And as you mentioned, for folks that are listening to this as only college sports fans that don't know a whole lot about the pros, the NBA draft now has a lottery system where they, kind of randomly pick based on, in the more games you lose, the better chance you have. But it's no longer just the worst team gets the number 1 pick, as it used to be. And then in Hakeem's situation, it did come down to that coin flip because there were 2 bad teams that year.
Right.
But it still was, you could very much control whether or not you got the first overall pick in a lot of ways, or at least had a shot at it. The 84 draft is historic. You cover the NBA in the present tense, but you've also written about guys like Giannis. I mean, the 84 draft still carries because it's got the Charles Barkley aspect. It's got Jordan. It's got the legendary Sam Bowie, who's a legend for all the wrong reasons, but is also a key part of this whole story. Hakeem is at the top of it. And I thought you did a really good job of hitting the thing that speaks to Hakeem's legacy is that Michael Jordan gets drafted 2 picks later and no one's upset with the Rockets for taking Hakeem. Right. As a California native, right? I think Houstonians kind of understand that story, but as a California native coming into that story, what do you realize as you get into that, or what do you see as you get into that?
I mean, I'm so floored that like again, like I'm coming at this from a totally different angle than you guys are, and I am shocked that nobody to this day says we should have drafted Jordan. Like not one person. And then I think if they did, they'd be like literally excommunicated from the city of Houston if such a thing was possible. Like you're gonna go over there. So I just was astounded by that. I loved reporting this chapter because I got Rod Thorne and Mike Tebow, who were the two people intimately selecting for the Bulls, and they were like, no question about it. If we had the number 1 pick, we were taking Olajuwon. And Mike Tebow got to go to the practices of Olajuwon at the Cougars and see him from the early freshman year when he was there at that practice to see another player all the way up until he was draft eligible. And the thing that's interesting that also people never really talk about with Hakeem is that, you know, people were wondering if he was going to leave school early from a much earlier time period than I think folks remember. Like there was a lot of speculation. Is he going to leave? Is he going to leave? And Olajuwon is like, leave? I didn't know you could leave. You know, like he's not aware of this, you know, until like Clyde Drexler is going through this and goes to the pros. So it's such a whirlwind. You go from like, who is this person to like, I think he's as good as Ewing, and is he going to leave for the pros? Like that's insane in 3 years to have the convo about you shift like that. So I just think the draft is so interesting. A lot of people love the what ifs, you know. But I think the plan all along was to have, you know, this idea of the Twin Towers and Sampson and Olajuwon. And I also think is cool is that the Rockets were not expecting Olajuwon to be this offensive genius. They knew they were drafting like a purely defensive, you know, powerhouse that hopefully could morph into more than just dunking on offense.
Well, and the Twin Towers thing, I think, is interesting because it's both emblematic of the time and that bigger is always better. Everyone wants the biggest guys. Part of the reason Olajuwon wants to pick everyone's going to take over Jordan in this instance is because Jordan's a 6'6" guard, and Olajuwon, even if he's 6'10", as you point out, I think pretty interestingly.
You love how they were like, oops, he actually isn't that
tall. However tall he is, he's a big man, right? In the most literal sense. And I think that's, you know, telling of the time. It also, though, features 2 big men that I would argue would actually be better if they played in 2024. And I think that's an interesting part of the story, too, is that, and you hit on it briefly, it's not a Ralph Sampson book, but like Sampson wanted to do these Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo kind of things, and was flatly told like no. Right.
For it.
As the person that did the Giannis book, as you're reading about those stories in this, and if you've only read the Hakeem book, I would go back and read the Giannis book as well. But as someone who's reporting this story, having done that work, what stuck out to you about both of these guys on the floor at 22-ish years old? Like, I don't think I'm crazy for saying they could play today, obviously, but would they be better today? I think so, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. And also having talked to Ralph Sampson, I mean, I have this like swell of compassion for him that I just kind of didn't when I started the project, or didn't know much other than he's 7'4". That's really all I knew, to be honest.
Okay, time out. He's 7'4", only because I've seen you in more than just on the screen. How tall are you, Mirin?
I'm 5'0".
I would love to see you sitting next to Ralph Sampson at a coffee shop.
I need it to happen. You know what? My favorite thing when I
would love it.
I would do anything to make it happen. There is a picture of me interviewing. I haven't had enough coffee. DeAndre Jordan, when I am an intern for the Clippers. I don't know if you've seen this pic. Occidental College put it on its website when they were profiling me. And I look like an ant. Okay. I look not even, I would say ant is being too generous. I look like a half an ant, and it's so bad. It's so embarrassing. and I'm like looking so professional in my little blazer, but I can't. He looks like he is like 3 of me.
Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, to get in on the action right now with FanDuel. Now, if you ever got the hunt for anything NFL in the middle of a game, you want to check out things like stats, play-by-play, whatever, they do all that in the same app as you can place your bets. Right now, you get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. So go to FanDuel.com right now and put down that $5. Have a chance to win $150 back in bonus bets if that hits. At FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports partner of the NFL.
Anyway, have fun finding that. I
I mean, I got to be honest. When you said 7 4, I was like, you got to interview him? In my head, I was like, you do a lot of this in person. I was like, did she get to see him?
No, this one was over the phone, sadly. But my go-to move is always like, "Hi, I know I'm really short. Can we please sit down for this interview? Because I will get a crick in my neck." Like I have, I have made friends in sports media from generous men taking my recorder, move and holding their long arms through the scrum for me to get closer to the guy. I mean, shout out to these people over the years, because I just can't get anywhere close, right? Like my arm, when I put it in the thing, it doesn't even get to the middle of the scrum. Anyway, I'm very short. These men are very tall. And I wanted to understand what it's like to be that tall. And so you see in the book, we kind of feel for Ralph Sampson. There's this whole, 2-page interlude about how he's made fun of his whole life as well. And how, people, they expect him to be this big burly person. He's like, I want to shoot. I want to be on the perimeter. I want to do these other things. And I feel bad for him as I'm going through this reporting, because I'm like, he would be so celebrated in today's age. Same with Hakeem. But I asked Ralph that, and I was like, do you feel any vindication now about, how you might be treated? Because, he was treated very poorly during his career by the press, and they called him soft and all these things, but really he was innovative. He wasn't soft. He was innovative. Yeah. And he was, I don't know if the quote made it into the book. It may have him alluding to Wemby and how like today the game is different, but he essentially said like, yeah, I think more people are starting to realize that now. But he's like, I'm at peace with it. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, and anecdotes about how the visual aside, I do think it's interesting because it weirdly makes Ralph Sampson out to be more of kind of in the same way Hakeem runs into these basic, like, what do you mean I can't do X, Y, Z? What do you mean? Like he's running into them as a, completely American kid. Like, he's running into the same kinds of hurdles. Weirdly, they're not the exact same. It's Hakeem, there's kind of a learning curve in joining basketball late and coming to America and finding those kinds of things, but there's just a similarity between their two stories, and they obviously click very quickly. They're not like completely out of place generationally. They get the 86 finals with the Houston Rockets, as you outline here. They run into who people would argue is the best basketball team of all time, certainly of the 20th century. First of all, I would stress that as Houstonians, that means that the James Harden, Chris Paul Rockets played at the same time as the Superstar Warriors, with Kevin Durant included, that the 86 Rockets run the 86 Celtics. Like, these things continue to happen.
Right.
But, the Cougs run into NC State on their run, and then they run into Baylor of a couple years ago in the 2021 Final Four. These things just keep happening. But in reporting on Hakeem through the 86 finals, obviously major losses are fairly transformative for every athlete. After 86, what did you notice about stories of Hakeem from like the late 80s, or how did that final series maybe impact the latter half of that decade for him?
Like, first there was this booming sense of optimism, right? Like, wow, we are a force to contend with. Look at this young group. We are so healthy. There's so much potential. We're going to take over. We beat the freaking Lakers to get here, right? And then it just kind of all goes out the window so quickly. It was not a gradual thing. There's injuries, there's drug suspensions. Talent is not what it was. They have issues at point guard. It's very hard for Olajuwon to really get into a groove because he's being like triple teamed. And then when he passes it out, they miss the shot most likely. And so offense doesn't flow. He's frustrated. He's a competitor. And all of a sudden, like the Rockets are really, really, really bad. And this idea of like this young twin tower thing is gone. And Ralph's traded. And all of a sudden, Hakeem's the man and he's got to win, but he does not have the squad around him. And I would argue he doesn't have the maturity or discipline to be that leader, to take them to that level. So it's such a stunning descent from where they were in that Celtics series.
Well, and I want to sit on that, and I don't mean this in a belittling way because, again, we've read the book, we know the story, we know that he grows out of it, but that lack of maturity, right? I thought you did a great job illustrating at several points. You like reminding the audience that this is a kid that is across the world from his family,
right,
at a lot of these major parts of his life, right? And then somewhat ironic, I felt like it was ironic that his family is at the 94 finals. Like, oh, they're at the high points, right?
Right.
Which there's probably a bigger thing to be said there. But he gets in this late 80s portion to me, he gets away from, and this is, feel free to completely correct me on this, and I'd be happy to be corrected. He steps away from being international. He's stepping further away from his faith. He is diving deeper into American superstardom, and he's excelling on the court individually. He's a tremendous basketball player, but as you mentioned, things around him keep getting worse. The team is worse. They mount losses. The coaches keep changing, etc. Do you see? There's a chapter in here called "Different," which is kind of roughly where we're at in the book, if you're following along. As he's stepping away from, not that he ever escapes being an international star, but he kind of falls into these more, I don't know, American problems. And it's a weird moment that, frankly, again, someone born in 91, someone who's looking back at this, and also someone who has not done the extensive research you did on this, it kind of feels like it sets up this ultimate rise. But at the time, that had to be kind of dauntingly, almost scary, intimidating what comes next. What can you tell us about that? As you mentioned, that he's like doesn't have the maturity.
Right.
This is a shift into leaning into. He's been in America almost 10 years now.
Yeah. I mean, he called it the dark years. I sort of looked at him as like wandering, searching, lost. He's partying. As one of his agents said, it's not like he was out there doing crazy things. Everyone partied. I mean, beer was supplied at the NBA locker rooms. Okay.
Right,
this was a different world. But it was something that obviously a devout Muslim person would not do. So he is living the American life, and he starts to feel adrift, and he can't really put his finger on why he feels like that, why things aren't working out, why he's successful but doesn't feel good. And it's not until he meets, this man, Henri Ybarrondo, his former lawyer and, father figure kind of mentor person that got really close, did he realize, like, in Henry's opinion, what was missing was family, because he's been gone for so long and he's been trying to make his way in America. And, you just get to a point, like so much happens and you finally like stop and you're like, okay, wait, I need to like really evaluate what I want, who I am, where I'm going. What do I need to do? Do I like myself? All these questions that every single one of us contends with. And he was not in a good place. And the two of them read this book, Happiness is an Inside Job, together. And they would just read it week after week. It was like a book club like this. And it was such a beautiful thing because, Olajuwon is so studious and so like intent to learn. And Henri is so generous and willing to offer wisdom. And the relationship does not work if one is not receptive or one is not giving. And both of them had this equal sort of hunger to talk and discuss. And it was just such a beautiful relationship that really set the stage for this like inner transformation that Olajuwon was about to endure.
Well, and I would stress that clearly what Mirin is saying is that book clubs save lives. So hit
Yes,
subscribe, buy the book, and follow along.
do it all.
And thank you to Mirin Fader for helping walk us through this bit here, all on Locked on Cougs. Locked on Cougs is happy to have her on for book club each and every week. Thanks again to Mirin. Again, the show notes should have a way to get a hold of the book. So thank you for copping the book, joining the fun. Next week, we'll be back with more. I don't think we'll quite finish up the book. So stay tuned, read along, follow along, and talk to us each and every week here with one Mirin Fader. Locked on Cougs, primer of the Locked On Podcast Network. It means your team every day. Go Cougs.